Englard. I'm so happy to welcome everybody to our first virtual book club, first virtual meeting of the Reading Israel Book Club. I'm so honored to be joined by a group of phenomenal women, all of whom have read this fabulous piece of fiction inspired by Zehava Englard. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody who's here and welcome everybody who's out there in the world. So lovely to meet everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just to give you a little bit about the Reading Israel Book Club, this is our very first live webinar about one of our books. And Reading Israel, the goal is to help people all over the world feel a greater connection and foster a greater connection to Israel through the written word, whether it be literature or fiction or even historical documents. We do our best to try and make writing about Israel accessible to the world and let that be an inspiration for a deeper personal connection to the Jewish state. So allow me to introduce Zehava. It's lovely to meet you face to face.
Same here.
I have to say, as you know, I've shared with you privately that I am not really a fiction person, and I just historical fiction mostly. What was interesting to me about the Gilboa Iris is that there was history in it, even though it wasn't historical fiction. I just found it to be a really captivating read, and even in a house with 3 children, I finished it in one day because I just couldn't put it down.
Great, thank you.
So, Zehava, why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us what inspired you to write this great book.
Okay, well, I'm not into fiction either, actually, but I believe that that was the best way to present a positive picture of Israel. I think when you try to force things down people's throats, they're not going to listen, but if you give a message in a more subtle manner, that people are more likely to hear what you have to say. As far as about me, I moved to Israel about 9 years ago. I have 4 children, 2 are married, 1 grandchild, yes.
All right.
And if you ask me what I do, I'm a writer. And I write primarily about Israel. That's the reason why I want to write. I believe very much that an honest voice about Israel has to be presented. I believe that we are, unfortunately, at war with the mainstream media, or they're at war with Israel. So I think we have to do whatever we can to combat that and present the truth about Israel and educate people on all the positive aspects of Israel, and there are many. So that's what I devote my life to.
That's fantastic. How does the Gilboa Iris, how did that play into it?
Okay.
Or actually, how is that more of a result of that desire?
It was actually accidental. I really never considered writing a novel. My first book was very factual, very political. It was about Jewish activism and what life is like living in Judea and Samaria. But this book came about after I visited a family that lost their son in a training accident in the Army. And at that time, it hit me very hard because I had 2 sons in the Army. So I was thinking after that visit, and I have to tell you, these people are truly amazing and heroic. And they truly believe, you know, when people say, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, that, you know, blessed be the true judge when a loved one falls in battle or passes away, they truly mean it. And I just wonder how I would react, God forbid, in such a situation, having 2 sons in the Army. And I couldn't even go there. And I actually tried, it sounds a little psychotic, but I actually tried to think about what my reaction would be. Since I couldn't do it through myself, it was too painful. I created this character Dara Harow, the hero of the book. And I explored my feelings through her. And before I knew it, it turned into an entire story in my head. And I thought, I have to write this down. And it developed into a book, one chapter at a time. And I believe that this was also a good way to present the true persona of the Israeli, because people out there outside of Israel really don't know, and they're hearing the horrible propaganda from the mainstream media. And like I said, I just felt it was very important to present in my own way, do whatever I could do, and present the true picture of the Israeli.
Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions they'd like to ask about that, about how the Gilboa Iris actually was for you something that provided a picture of Israel? Actually, how many of you read it while you were in Israel, and how many of you read it from outside of Israel? Let's start there, because I think that also says a lot.
In Israel.
You read it in Israel.
In Israel.
Everybody, did anybody read it from the diaspora? So that, I wonder if that makes a difference too, because maybe that perspective for me, I tried kind of to take a step out of being Israeli in order to read it and say, it like knocked me off my feet in terms of nostalgia of that. Oh my God, the hot Israeli guy, and they're just the way that they're so, you think that they're harsh, but they're really not. I mean, I felt like this young American woman all over again, even though after 10 years in Israel, I don't really feel like that American woman anymore. So did anybody else relate to that?
This book is Israel.
Yeah, how
It's
so?
Israel. Street names, city names, life. As a tourist, I once heard a tour guide say, here in Israel, we marry and we bury. And
Wow.
This is it. It's real. It's what we live with on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't here for the very bad times, but I got into them in the book. It's life. It's our life.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
I connected especially to this book because I did my army service in the Gilboa. I did it
Wow.
in Gilboa, and I could actually, just the way she described it, just picture all of it happening, the fields, where, what. I knew exactly the places. I thought it was amazing.
That's
It was
awesome.
amazing. It was
What a great
exciting.
compliment to you, huh?
It was exciting.
Actually, when Nomi was doing her army service on the Gilboa, I was actually on the Gilboa doing Shehut Lumi.
That's right.
Wow.
So we didn't know each
We
other.
didn't know
then.
each other then.
We just
So
met
so
here.
the experience that you write about, that of being there, I mean, for anybody who's been on Mount Gilboa, you know that it's extremely, extremely powerful. The landscape that you see, the history that we know that took place there, for those of you who don't know, it's the famous battle, the final battle between Saul and his sons and the Philistines, and they actually commit suicide rather than to be taken into the hands of the enemy. So there's this huge history that's there. So actually it was inspired by your actual presence there?
Yes, but I would like to reiterate here, the love story is not an autobiography. Okay, I started the story, I began the first scene of the book on Gilboa because you write what you know about.
Yes.
And kibbutz life and the whole scenario there, I knew like the back of my hand. So it was a very easy way for me to begin the book. And yeah, so no, there was no Roni in my life. Too bad. But I worked very hard on the kibbutz.
And so is Ronnie the main male character that, well, at the beginning anyway, this really Israeli, I mean, there's such the stereotype of what the Israeli guy is. I actually think, and maybe you guys agree or disagree, that it's changed nowadays. What a diaspora person might come and visit with Israel, I don't think it's always the same as it was. What was it, 1983 that you read about, right?
Yes.
1986. I can't remember the.
It was after the first Lebanon War, so
Right.
1983.
So you have like a whole. I remember I came to Israel the first time. It was 1986, 87, and I was 13, and it was like. Oh my God. I mean, it was just eye-opening, and I'm also from Louisville, Kentucky, so it was a whole other realm of eye-opening.
Jews.
Yeah, there are Jews in Kentucky. But it was, I think that the type of character that Roni is a very strong depiction of how a Israeli male is complex. So you mentioned in the initial description that you really went chapter by chapter, it was building itself. So when you started off, did you know what was going to happen? Did you have a vision of where you wanted the book to go?
I did have a vision of where I wanted it to go, but I had about 2 or 3 different endings. So, and there were quite a few chapters. I have to say that wrote itself. It just seemed like a natural way to go. And it wasn't until the end that I really knew exactly which way it was going. And I have to say that I remember taking a walk one Shabbat with Michelle. And I was trying to figure out really which ending I was going to take. And I brainstormed with Michelle, and she helped me figure it out, actually.
That's
So
fabulous.
I loved it.
How does it feel to sit here today with Zehava in her first virtual book club?
It's amazing. It really is. I read the book 4 times.
Wow.
And if you gave it to me now, I'd go home and start reading it again.
It really
and
is.
every time it was as exciting, and I was so involved in the characters.
Do you have a favorite?
I love Roni. I just do.
I think it's hard not to love
Roni.
Roni.
I fought for him.
It was almost devastating to have to go through his experiences. And one of the things that I know spoke to me from the very beginning was you reflected upon, and maybe now I understand it a little bit better, you already from the beginning talk about something very unique to Israeli families, which is that issue of loss within their family, loss of a brother or father, someone in the family who either has lost their life or suffered in whatever way from the war. That couldn't have been easy to have expressed, having not experienced it yourself.
Okay, so there is a particular chapter where I really have to get into the core of what it's like to feel that kind of loss. And I certainly didn't want to show any arrogance about it, because if you don't know, if you haven't been through it, how can you possibly tell? So I tried to be very sensitive, and I think that's why it came out the way it did. It was very raw, and it wasn't, at least my take on it, as to the way I would react, was not brave. I don't think, and it was just totally emotional. And I really, I have to tell you that while writing the book, I was the book, and I would be walking in the streets, and I really wouldn't see anything in front of me except for the book. And in fact, in that chapter, it was very depressing, and it was very difficult to write. And I remember going to Marilyn's house one day, and during that time, and she said, "Zehava, get away from that book. You're depressed. You're worrying about me. I mean, I'm worried about you."
Personal.
And I was totally immersed in it, and I truly became Dara. Dara is not me, but I did become Dara. And I think that's how I was able to write that particular chapter.
I think that actually speaks to
I don't want to give it away,
No, but I think that speaks to a lot of the book, because I know that for me, it literally felt almost like I was reading someone's diary. It was such a personal perspective.
Very
It was like Dara was the author, so you are Dara. that makes sense, that it flowed so one experience into the other. Even the little bickering between Dara and Roni, and even the little bickering between, different characters, that you have these little tiny incidents, and that, again, I think you'd agree, is also very Israeli, that we have these, we'll butt heads 15 times a day, and yet that's just a part of our life.
I love bickering also. So it's really natural.
Let's see what good bickering we can get happening here. So, what other questions or thoughts did you ladies have about the book?
And we talked about it a little. When I first started to read it, and I looked at that section again today, where she's talking about her grandfather and the language her grandfather used with her about the reestablishment of Israel. And I always use the word reconstitution as opposed to birth or creation, and I was in that moment, I could see where this young woman's mind was going, this deeper understanding of what Israel means to us. And that was really moving. Just that one word just popped out at me. And she learned from her grandfather, and she talks about her love for Pops, isn't that what she called her grandfather? And that was so moving to me, that this young woman understood that at that moment.
Maybe, Irene, you can actually elaborate on that a little, because I bet some of the people viewing don't really understand what you mean by the difference, because it sounds almost like the same idea. Reconstitute, reestablish, it's really a synonym. What do you see as the nuance of difference?
Well, I don't see any difference in that. What I do is see the difference between those two words and the founding of Israel, which is something that's always, when you hear that, and as somebody who was born in 1947, the end of 1947, so I'm the same age as Israel, I always think, wait a minute, it wasn't created. It's been there. We were just told to leave 2,000 years earlier. Right. It's not like Israel ceased to exist 2,000 years ago. It existed that whole time. And I think that kind of understanding among young people, and this young character who's not you, but is part of you, it really struck me, because it's a sensibility that sometimes young people aren't going to see. And we only learn that as young people from our elders, or from people who mentor us, or give us that gift of language, so we can distinguish between what this means and this means. And for me, that was just the beginning of the book, to understand that here was a young woman who was going to have her own thoughts, but she was also wise enough to learn. And that was the beginning of her connection to Israel. And later on, she talks about her love of the land and what it means to her, and what it means for the Jewish people to be here. So it is a romance. I don't read romance novels, but being a political person, I see that side of it also. And that was really, I think, in the first 30 pages or something. It was pretty early on.
It's a romance both between people, but also with the land.
And the land. I mean, it was a two-part thing. It wasn't just, this hot Israeli guy. I mean, it is that. But it was also that part of the experience, because as much as he was there, she loved what she was doing.
Yeah, I found that was best expressed in the fact that nearly, I would say almost every page, but at least every few pages, you make a mention of the historical significance of where they are, or the historical significance related to something they're talking about. History is really innately ingrained into the language that you're using, into the way that you're telling the story, and I thought that was really well done. It's not an easy thing to achieve, because history can be, from the perspective of many, so dry and boring, and unfortunately today so easily erased.
Well, I thought it was important, just as important as having the hot guy romance thing. I thought it was very important to keep showing our direct connection to the land. It's not something made up. It's our history.
And that was a part of the writing process, or do you think that was so much a part of you, it was just a natural aspect of what you were writing?
It was something I wanted to do, but it did come up naturally within the story itself.
And that's very much part of your personality too. I mean, we've only met a couple of times, but I know that you're very, very outspoken of what you believe and where you stand, and you're not ashamed. And I think that Dara also, she goes through her life's experiences of being this very proud Jewish woman who is innately connected to this land and this country and the people that are a part of it. So that naturalness, I think it does exude from the author, but I wonder, does that speak to all of its readers? Do you think that there are people who might read your book and say, this is just another love story to try and, a phrase that I often use, you know, blue and whitewash, make it like everything about Israel is so great. Are you worried about that at all?
Not really, because I felt that the positive image I was giving about Israel, the way I was portraying the people, and what actual life is like here, I thought it was done in a natural, subtle way. And like I said in the beginning, I didn't want to shove any opinions down anybody else's throats, but just to present it in an entertaining way and in a soft approach, in a gentle approach. And I think in the end, it allows people to decide on their own whether they accept it or not.
Very much so.
And that's how I wanted it.
I think it was an era, and we all loved the book because, you know, we all looked at that time, you know, it was politically correct to love Israel and to love the characters and to love the land.
How times have changed.
Yeah. And I think we reminisced. We read the book and we all reminisced. The Israel that was. Why? It is still that way. The people and the land. And why now does it seem like we always have to fight to live here, to love Israel?
And fight for our right even just to love Israel. It's like we're always having to defend ourselves against those who say we have no right, not only leave to the side the do we have a right to the land question, but the do we have a right to love Israel? That question seems to be jeopardized all the time.
Right, and we would all read the book in the privacy of our own homes. Nobody could tell us otherwise. And we would all have our own, personal feeling about that era and what it was like for us. And we were reading it through this book, and it was certainly bringing me back. And, instead of leaving the house, I just wanted to read the book and stay in the house. Because I was afraid once I get out there, everything starts to...
And did you have that nostalgic love affair also when you were a teenager here?
I absolutely did. I absolutely did.
What was his name, Joanne?
Which one? But, in many ways, the kibbutz, movement now, there aren't as many volunteers.
Right.
And it's sad. It's sad. People have to visit and come to Israel in different ways, and people end up falling in love with Israel. But it's different than it was. During those times, it was so simple and so innocent.
Do you think there's the simplicity is given way to other much more meaningful aspects of Jewish life here, even though it might be challenging, but it's also given way to something really meaningful. Do you think though that for those of us who came to Israel and then went back and that, we have that nostalgia, that kept us going from the diaspora, do you think that still exists today? When somebody comes to visit Israel, let's say Dara would to visit Israel on birthright, okay? Do you think that she would go home with that same passion and desire that people had back in the 80s? We know that there are incidences that it does happen, but is that something that you are wanting to perpetuate through all your readers?
I think Birthright is an excellent organization, an excellent vehicle to get unaffiliated Jews interested in Israel. But I have to say that there is no experience that compares to actually getting down and dirty and working the land. Nothing compares to that.
True.
So, and that's how I felt when I was working on a kibbutz. It was one of the best years of my life. But what I would also like to say is, as nostalgic as it is, that the book begins in 1983, it does take you up to current times, and it does have that whole global jihad scenario going on, and of course that's where the adventure and suspense comes in. So, guys, it's not all romance.
But interestingly enough, it's a book that's written How many years have passed since it was written? Not since it was, of course, brought to light, but.
When that, probably, no, it was written about, 4 years ago,
4 years
3 or
ago.
4 years ago,
I
and
mean,
yeah.
just how much the world has changed
Mm.
and world opinion about Israel has changed so much just within those last few years.
Yes and no, but in the book it does mention the ICBMs
It
and
does.
the Nazi connection
Absolutely.
to Islamic Jihad.
Yeah.
And so some things never change.
Let's actually jump
unfortunately.
into something because I have to ask, how much research did you have to do into the Mossad in order to be able to write the chapters that relate, the aspects that relate to the Mossad?
I did a lot of research.
If you tell her, you'll have to kill her.
During the webinar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know that she can tell you those.
Yeah, I can't mention certain names, but I did a tremendous amount of research on everything, even on the history, the facts that I knew. When you write a book, you still want to get all the details correct. So everything was researched. In fact, even down to the minutest thing, there was one chapter where I had to write how to dismantle a car's engine without destroying the car. Yeah, I can't even pump gas. So,
Totally, all of us.
so thank God for Google. And I learned how to, dismantle an engine. So beware. And so everything had to be researched. Even things that I knew. Everything was researched just to make sure that I give the most accurate story I can, and that no one will sue me. So
That's a very important
Yeah.
part of any writing, I assume, when it comes especially to fiction.
right, and of
'cause
course I had to do research on the Mossad, and I spoke to many people in the military, including my own sons, where I have to get details. Just little details.
So let me ask a
about
really
my life.
sensitive question, almost dangerous question, I guess. Let's say if nobody from the Mossad is watching, but did anyone resent the Mossad from the situations that arose in the book? Come up with this, how could they?
No, of course.
Question.
I think we all did. I think because of what happened, without saying what happened,
Yeah.
it was so unfair to the people that were in the book and it was only caused by the Mossad.
And is that
So I think-
uniquely Israeli in your opinion?
I don't think it's
No.
You know?
No, I think the CIA does the
I
same
think
thing.
it's-
think
I
they-
think
I think
I
they-
think the CIA is
Yeah.
worse.
Right, well,
I think
But who cares about that?
no, I'm just saying.
I think
There is that.
I think people have to have some understanding that when you are involved with Mossad or the CIA, if you are a Mossad operative, that there is a level of sacrifice. And we certainly know from our own people how many Mossad operatives have sacrificed.
I think in
Their
Israel it's more
family life,
personal because we know people that have gone through that. I don't know a CIA person, I never will.
Yeah.
But here, it's like, it
Like
affects
it's a very
everybody.
small family.
Everybody.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to Zehava. I wasn't privileged, and I say that sincerely, to live here during those years, those very tough times. I didn't build the land. I didn't serve in the military, the army. I didn't have family who served. I didn't lose anyone. And yet I feel as though I lost everyone. I got here in 1986 and fell in love. I was in Israel one day. Cruise. I knew I would be back here, and I am. But thanks to you and Gilboa Iris, I feel as though those experiences you write about have just come from, they touch my heart. And I've read the book more than once, as you can see. It's gone with me to various Shabbatot, and I'm proud to say it's bent and wrinkled and used and loved. And thank you.
Thank you. That's an amazing compliment. Thank you.
So what other questions do you ladies have that might help also those who are watching from around the world have some questions for Zehava to help personalize this Meet the Author experience?
I can say I was here as a child, and I was here as a teenager, and I was in high school, and one summer a friend of mine was on some Bnei Akiva group, and she was on a kibbutz, and she was like, you know what, you've got nothing else to do. Come work on the kibbutz. So I ended up working on a kibbutz, and for me, reading these kibbutz scenes brought everything back to life. I mean, I wasn't doing the same kind of thing they were doing. I was picking grapes, but it was still like the hot, the heat, the dust, you know, just being outside, having to get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and schlep yourself out to like some vineyard, and you're just like, oh my God, how much longer? But all of this sort of, I mean, it all awoke in me, you know, just from reading the book. I was like, oh my God, things that I had totally forgotten, details, tiny little details, like, oh my God, like if it was the spiders, if it was, it all just sort of came back to life just reading those sections. So I think that, you know, definitely there was, for those of us who were here, you know, for, you know, as kids, I think that it was definitely a part of nostalgia.
Yeah,
And,
I actually did work in the kitchen as well, on the moshav that I lived on. And I mean, having to make homemade hummus and the Israeli salad every day for the entire, I mean, it's daunting. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, yeah, like I can get it, you know? Am I cutting all of the vegetables small enough to meet the Israeli quality, you know, standards? It was, and it was incredibly well described. It really did. It felt like I was reading something that had happened to a friend. So I thought that was just really something that kept me going throughout the book. So,
And
go ahead.
even if you didn't have that specific experience, I felt in the book it brought it so much to life that you could really relate to it, and you could really understand what Dara was going through in every respect. And especially also nice, which we didn't talk about too much here, was the romance, which was so wonderful to read. And like it has so many different aspects of the book, of like espionage and passionate about Israel and interpersonal relationships and sorrow and happiness. But there's also that wonderful romance part that was also felt very realistic, and you felt very involved in the relationship of Dara and whoever she was in a relationship with. I don't want to reveal anything here. So, and it was hard also for me to step back and say, okay, this is actually not Zehava that I'm reading about. So, because that would be extremely personal to have, you know, image of. But it was
Yeah, there were some intense scenes.
It was
There were very hot scenes there, but
Yeah.
I purposely did not get too graphic. I
Right.
wanted
That's
the imagination.
It's pretty rough.
But I think people's imagination is more graphic, exactly.
50 Shades of the Kibbutz.
So you could imagine how I felt when my 22-year-old son at the time read the book, and he kept telling me he had to, like, you know, stop. Okay, this is not my mother who wrote it. And if that wasn't a problem, my 85-year-old mother, just the other day, she's saying, I still go back and read chapters of the book. I was thinking, which chapters?
I have to share my younger sister. My younger sister Ariana has. So when we first came to Israel, she was. I guess she was 5, yeah. And she has since written actually a blog about this, about what it was like to pick up soldiers, and that, you know, these hot soldiers who were sitting next to her in the backseat of the car. And the way she writes about it is really well. She would never consider herself a writer, but the way she wrote about it was also just so natural, exuding of this emotion that we have as girls, as women, yes, but as girls, and that love. Was there a part of you that felt girlish writing the book? I mean, you come off in the book, Dara is very much a woman, but do you feel that girlishness, that girlish innocence, and that, you know, almost naivete, but a beautiful one?
In the very beginning, when she
Yeah.
first meets Roni, yes,
Yeah.
and he gives her a difficult time. Yeah, I did feel that in the very beginning, but it became a more mature relationship as time went on. So
Took a while for Roni to get mature, so.
yeah, true. But I love that part too. I mean, like I said, I love the fighting part.
You've said that you normally wouldn't have written fiction, that you yourself are not a fiction person. So what was it that you enjoyed about fictionalizing this romance between Dara and Roni?
Getting a little personal here.
Let's all make a l'chaim on our daily wine to Zehava opening up to us.
I don't know, maybe it was my way of rewriting my childhood and or teenage years the way I would have wanted it to be rewritten. No, I didn't just say that, did I?
What we would do if we could get to high school, right?
But it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was fun writing that. But I knew it was going to get very serious, and that's why I really took my time writing all the fun parts. So I just wanted it to have a flavor of everything. I wanted it to run through every human emotion possible. So
I want to touch on one line that really spoke to me because of what I think a lot of Jews today in the world are struggling with. Both those who've made the decision to be here, maybe those who are struggling with the decision, how they feel about Israel, they want to live in Israel. I'm going to really draw attention to you. Irene, who's just about to celebrate her 6-month Aliyah. How many years have you been planning your Aliyah?
My brother says he thinks I started when I was about 5 or 6. Because he remembers me coming home from Hebrew school. He's 7 years older than me. So he was already in his bar mitzvah, his bar mitzvah phase. And I came home with a little flag. And somebody asked me when I learned Hatikva, and I said, oh, I think I had to sing it when I came home from Hebrew school to my father, who died very young. So, that was the inspiration. And always that reminder that I was born at what they call the same time Israel was born, at least American Jews refer to it as that. But I think it for a lot of American Jews, it didn't run through the family, that constant reminder. And for me, it was always there. So, I don't know whether my brother's right or not. I said, well, you're in your 70s. What do you remember? But, he remembers that I had that feeling. And, of course, it kept getting delayed career, taking care of my mom as she died. And then all of a sudden, I realized I'm retired. I can do whatever I want. And that's when I started to blog about it. And it was a little over 2 years ago when I started to write about it constantly. So I think the part about Dara in the beginning that you were just talking about, that youthful exuberance, and you touched on it a little, that I didn't know here, because I didn't come here as a child, and I didn't come here as a young person. I came as an older person years ago, but I was already older, and I knew, and I think it's all about risk taking, and she does that as a young woman. It's not just the youthful exuberance, it carries through her life. And I loved watching her mature.
I think that the decision that she had to make to leave her family in the very beginning is something that a lot of people, and maybe all of us here, had to go through at some point. I too come from uber Zionist parents, true Israel lovers. And they also had always, they just knew Aliyah was going to happen, but it was like, well, when, and maybe the career first, and this and that. And you have a line here of, my immigrating to Israel diametrically opposed their worldview and their own aspirations in American society. And I think that speaks dead on to what a lot of American Jews today are struggling with, that they may feel this love, and let's leave the Aliyah even out of it. They feel this love for Israel, and yet they're surrounded by a society that says that's just not okay with our worldview and what Israel's doing. And let's not, we could bring up the current events, but let's just leave it as it is, that there are so many things about Israel that the world doesn't agree with. And so anyone who finds themselves in the early position of Dara is saying, I basically have to stand up for what I believe in. You have to be really strong to do that. Is that a challenge you yourself also had to face? Or was that something you wanted to give to Dara as something unique to her and her character?
That's something that was unique to Dara. I personally did not go through that. I came from a very Zionistic family, and I've always wanted to make Aliyah since a very young age. And yeah, in that time, the world wasn't against Israel, so it was okay. But now it is different, as you say. But in Dara's case, her parents were not at all connected to Israel, and they were social climbers. Her father worked for the United States government, and there was a big question of dual loyalty because he worked for the Defense Department. So she had to deal with those complications.
Interestingly enough, that dual loyalty seemed unique to him because of his job, but I don't feel like that's the case anymore. That question of dual loyalty seems to plague everyone in the diaspora. Argue and there was the term that came up, what is it already, 6 years ago, the question of Jews being Israel firsters. It was actually a term that was starting to be used to refer to Jews in America. So,
Right.
I mean, first, Israel firsters, listen, isn't it our hope that all the Jewish people would be Israel firsters? We're the children of Israel. But it's meant as such a derogatory reference. So his character, the father, Dara's father, it's because of his job, or so it seems, but really it's reflective of everybody today, isn't it?
Today especially, which unfortunately I believe is behind the fact that so many Jews just want to American Jews just want to distance themselves away from Israel, and many young Jews on the college campuses are just not affiliated with Israel. I mean, there are some that try to combat the anti-Israel movements on campus these days, but not enough.
And I always wonder about the people, like when she goes back to America and she has that, she does have that year on campus and these things that happen to her. I question also, well, what about people who are in the workplace? And they're not on campus. There isn't a support system around them. And this is a little bit about why we at Israel Forever do what we do, which is to say you don't all have to be public advocates in order to have Israel in your life and in your heart. And so, but I think that it's limited. People are afraid. And that's something that I think from the very beginning, I can say that I kind of resented her parents. I really was like angry at them. And only later on do we learn some of the ongoing story, totally worth reading the ongoing story, and seeing that it's much deeper than that, and there is an emotional factor that maybe we kind of give enough credit to. And that's, so who would you recommend the book to?
I actually wrote the book targeting it to Jews who are not connected to Israel and non-Jews who don't know enough about Israel.
Right.
So I wanted it to be an educational book. So while it is a romance adventure novel, it is historical. It is up to date as well educationally. And I wrote it as a tool to educate people on the truth about Israel. So it's not targeted at all to Jews who are already connected to Israel.
Because the ones who are already connected, they all have the nostalgia that we have, and like, oh my
We're
God,
just thinking about the hot guys.
Yeah. That's true. That's very true. So what other things might anybody else like to ask or share about the impact that this book has, not only on you as the reader, but on why you also might recommend it for people? Why should people come, of all of the romance novels out there, and there are others, and that also deal with Israel? Personally, I don't think that in the same way at all, but I believe that's also because of the women's perspective. I actually looked into it a little, and you do not find a lot of novels like this written by women.
Right.
And there was one that I found, and I'm not going to mention the name, but one that I found it's written by a woman, but it's not written from a woman's perspective. And you bring that as you are a woman author, you are a not only a mother, a wife, a girlfriend, an immigrant, you're raising all of these aspects about yourself, including being a writer, and you pour that into this book. It could not have been written in the same way had it not been written by a woman. Did you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Passion also, there's a certain light to passion.
Yeah.
Certain, it's like a certain light that she shows when it comes to the passion part.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's really, that's a great talent. Now, this is your second book, right?
It's my second book, yes.
So we have a question from the world, shall we say, and that is there going to be a sequel? What do you
And a
think?
movie.
Let's take a
The
vote.
sequel and movie.
I would
Like,
love
What's
to
this trailer we're
The trailer
seeing?
is fabulous.
Is the trailer for a movie that's coming out? We don't know that.
The trailer is to hopefully interest people in
Mm.
the business to make it into a movie. I think it would make a great movie.
Awesome.
I agree.
Awesome.
I'm not a
All right, guys, let's get to work and make the Gilboa Iris a film.
The truth is, I'm not. I am thinking. My mind is already working on a third
Hot
book,
actor.
but it's not going to be a sequel.
No.
At this point, I don't think so.
There's something that makes me want to know what happens to the children.
Right.
The next
I said the
generation.
same thing.
The children.
There,
What is
I said the same thing, that she should go on the next generation. Yeah, and like
Yeah.
especially with today, like how we see all these like Olim kids who've been here and grew up here, but they all go to the States for a year and they do this, they do all these different little things that I think that to take, say, one of Dara's children and have them also do their year in overseas and have them sort of meet somebody and and work it from there.
okay, the thought had crossed my mind, and I actually worked on some kind of scenario there. We'll see. Maybe.
There's a line that you use in the book that actually I believe, I'm just going to find it real quickly. It's that it's said by Roni to Dara, and he just makes a brief statement of it's like abandoning your fellow soldiers on a battlefield. And she says, but we're not at war now. And he answers, Dara, we're always at war. So I read it again and I get the same chills I got when I first read it. And the tears come to my eyes and I just think, this flower, this little flower who, I don't know how many of you know actually the story of the revival of the Gilboa Iris flower, because I found that interesting. I'm sure you know it.
I read
but
your
it's-
review. I know there was much about it. I did not know. I was
Really?
fascinated by what
Well,
you wrote.
just share that the Gilboa Iris is actually an ancient flower. It was almost extinct here in Israel. And then it was discovered by somebody who was working for the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. And they ended up replanting and recreating all of the fields that had been in existence. This flower is indigenous to Israel. And it was, for me, while the Gilboa Iris was chosen because of the location they were in and the flower that he gives to her, for me, because I had actually none of the history, and that's because my husband is very much into nature, and I hear about every single flower. He can recite every name of every flower, and I remember coming to Israel when I was young, and one of the things I always knew about Israelis, especially the Israeli men, is that they'll walk by any plant and they'll take a leaf and they'll and they can tell you the name of it in Latin and Hebrew and everything, and it's like, oh my God, like they know their land there. And so yes, that's my husband as well. But that's the thing about the Gilboa Iris, is that it's such a part of just their personal story, but it's such a part of Israel. And I have you ever been, if you've ever been to Har Hamon, to Har Gilboa, and you see them in bloom, it's just breathtaking. It really is, and I think that says a lot. The name, the flower that it represents, and the story that it brings together, it's really incredibly woven. It's woven as a tale that should stand the test of time, really, and to be passed on. I would encourage a lot of people to read it and to share with your friends. And anything that you might like to add?
I think you said it all.
This was so much fun,
It was so much
ladies.
fun.
We're gonna have to do this with every book of the book club. It really is a great opportunity to be able to bring Israel through the written word to the world. I think that most people would go and pick up the more well-known, and it's not that the Gilboa Iris shouldn't be well-known, but very often those politically charged books are getting all of the press, or it's who the author is that makes it. They're going to get all the press. Well, I think that this is a book that certainly deserves to be in many, many Jewish bookshelves, non-Jewish bookshelves, in literature classes, in high schools, even in the higher grades, because I think that it does, as we said from the very beginning, it gives something that when you're not here, it kind of fills a void. It fills up your heart, says, there's a passion. I think that's the right word.
Alana, I want to thank you, first of all, for featuring this book. And
Absolutely.
the Israel Forever Foundation is actually doing the same thing I want to do, just get the good word about Israel out there. And I also want to thank everybody here who joined us for this little coffee clutch discussion, or wine discussion.
Yeah. What would it be without a glass of Israeli wine? Is it from the Gilboa region, maybe?
It is actually.
I
A little further north, but
There you go. There you
but
go.
close enough.
Well,
Yes.
l'chaim to everybody,
L'chaim.
and to everybody at home. Thank you
Good
so
luck.
much for joining us. And feel free to send any questions straight to Zehava through our website, israelforever.org. And we'll be happy to pass them along. And you never know, maybe we'll have a second encounter for your next book that comes out.
I hope so.
Okay.
That would be
Well,
great.
thank you again, everybody, and l'chaim.
L'chaim.
All right, I'll make my way over and turn it off. We'll say goodbye.
Thanks, Alana.
Absolutely.
And really, everybody,